The rain tapped against the window of the old Victorian house, a soft but relentless rhythm that seemed to echo the ache in Eleanor's chest. At 65, she had grown accustomed to carrying grief like a second skin, its weight familiar yet never lighter. 20 years ago, her world had shattered when her son, Daniel, was declared dead after a car accident. The police had shown her the wreckage, the charred remains of a vehicle that held no trace of her 8-year-old boy. She had buried an empty coffin, her heart splintering with every shovelful of dirt. Her husband, Richard, had stood beside her, stoic and silent, his hand cold in hers. They had survived, or so she thought, by leaning into routine, into silence, into the hollow spaces where love once lived. Eleanor sat now in the attic, surrounded by boxes of memories she hadn't touched in years. The air was thick with dust, and the single bulb overhead flickered, casting shadows across the room. She had come up here to find an old quilt for the guest room, but her hands had wandered to a cardboard box labeled Daniel. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the lid, revealing a collection of his things, a stuffed bear. It's formatted, a drawing of a rocket ship. The crayon lines faded. A photograph of him at 7, grinning with a missing front tooth. Her throat tightened. She had avoided this box for so long, afraid it would unravel her. But tonight, something urged her forward, a quiet pull she couldn't explain. As she sifted through the relics, her hand brushed against a small, leather-bound journal tucked beneath a pile of birthday cards. It wasn't Daniel she would have recognized his childish scrawl. The journal belonged to Richard. Its pages were worn, the ink smudged in places, but the words were legible. Eleanor hesitated, her loyalty to her husband warring with a sudden, gnawing curiosity. She opened it, her eyes scanning the first entry, dated a month after Daniel's supposed death. I can't tell her. She wouldn't survive it. The boy is safe, but it's better this way. For her. For us. The words hit like a punch to the gut. Eleanor's breath caught, her vision blurring as she reread the sentence. The boy is safe. Her heart pounded, a wild, frantic rhythm. What did it mean? Daniel was dead. She had mourned him, grieved him, built her life around his absence. Yet here, in Richard's own hand, was a confession that shook the foundation of her reality. She turned the page, her hands shaking so violently she nearly tore the paper. Met with Clara today. She says he's growing strong. Looks like me. It kills me to stay away, but it's the only way to keep him hidden. Clara. The name sliced through Eleanor's memories like a blade. Clara was Richard's sister, a woman who had always kept her distance, her visits rare and strained. Eleanor had never questioned it. Clara was private, eccentric, living in a small town 3 hours away. But now, the pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed began to snap together. Her son heard Daniel was alive, hidden, and Richard, her husband of 40 years, had known. She slammed the journal shut, her chest heaving. The attic felt suffocating, the walls closing in. She stumbled downstairs, clutching the journal like a lifeline, her mind racing with questions that burned like fire. Richard was in the kitchen, reading the paper, his glasses perched on his nose. He looked up as she entered, his expression shifting from calm to wary as he saw the journal in her hand. Eleanor, what's wrong? His voice was steady, but there was a flicker of something fear, perhaps in his eyes. She held up the journal, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. What is this? Richard, what did you do? He froze, his face paling. For a moment, the only sound was the rain, heavier now, pounding against the roof. Ellie, let me explain. Explain. She shouted, her voice breaking. You wrote that Daniel is alive. That you hid him. For 20 years. Richard. 20 years I thought my son was dead. Tears streamed down her face, hot and unstoppable. How could you do this to me? To us. Richard stood, his hands raised as if to calm her. But she backed away, the journal still clutched to her chest. It was for your safety, he said, his voice low, urgent. You were so fragile after the accident. The truth would have destroyed you. The truth. She spat. The truth that my son is alive. That you lied to me every day for 2 decades. Where is he? Richard. Where is my son? He hesitated. And in that pause, Eleanor saw the depth of his betrayal. It wasn't just a lie, it was a life stolen. A family broken. She turned and grabbed her coat, ignoring his pleas as she stormed out into the rain. She needed answers, and she wouldn't find them in the house that had become a prison of secrets. The drive to Clara's town was a blur, the windshield wipers barely keeping up with the storm. Eleanor's hands gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. Her mind churned with memories of Daniel's laugh, his small hand in hers, the way he'd call her mama with such trust. She had failed him, hadn't she? She had believed the lie, buried her grief, and moved on. But now, the possibility that he was alive ignited a fire in her she hadn't felt in years. Clara's house was a modest cottage at the edge of town, its lights glowing faintly through the rain. Eleanor parked and sat for a moment, steadying herself. What would she say? What would she find? She knocked, her heart in her throat, and when Clara opened the door, her face registered shock before settling into a guarded expression. Eleanor, Clara said, her voice tight. What are you doing here? I know, Eleanor said, holding up the journal. I know about Daniel. Clara's eyes widened, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she stepped aside, gesturing for Eleanor to come in. The living room was warm, cluttered with books and photographs. Eleanor's gaze landed on a picture on the mantel, a young man, maybe 28, with dark hair and eyes that mirrored her own. Her knees buckled, and Clara caught her arm, guiding her to a chair. Is that him? Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible. Clara nodded, her expression softening. His name is David now. He doesn't know about you. We told him his parents died when he was young. Eleanor's world tilted. Her son was alive, but he didn't know her. He had a new name, a new life, and she had been erased from it. Eleanor sat in Clara's living room, the photograph of the young man burning a hole in her vision. Her hands trembled as she clutched the journal, its pages a map of her husband's betrayal. The rain outside had softened to a drizzle, but the storm inside her raged on. Clara stood across the room, her arms crossed, her face a mix of guilt and defiance. Why? Eleanor asked, her voice raw. Why would you and Richard do this? He was my son. Clara sighed, sinking into a chair opposite Eleanor. It wasn't supposed to be forever, she said. After the accident, Richard was terrified. The police said there was a Threeta man who blamed Richard for a business deal gone wrong. He swore he'd come after you, after Daniel. Richard thought the only way to keep you both safe was to make it look like Daniel was gone. Eleanor's mind reeled. A threat. She remembered Richard's late nights at the office, the whispered phone calls he'd brush off as work. She had trusted him, believed in their shared grief. So you faked his death? She asked, her voice rising. You let me bury an empty coffin. You let me cry myself to sleep for years. Clara's eyes dropped to the floor. I didn't want to. Richard begged me. He said you were too fragile, that knowing the truth would break you. I took Daniel Davidin, raised him as my own. I thought I was protecting him. Protecting him. Eleanor's laugh was bitter, hollow. You stole him. You stole my son, and you let me live in a lie. She stood, pacing the small room, her anger a living thing. Where is he now? I want to see him. Clara hesitated, her fingers twisting together. He's not here. He lives in the city. Works as a mechanic. He's happy. Eleanor. He has a life. A life without me, Eleanor said, her voice breaking. Does he know anything about me? About his real mother? Clara shook her head. We told him his parents died in the accident. It was cleaner that way. He was so young, didn't question it. Eleanor's knees felt weak again, but she refused to sit. She needed to move, to do something, to reclaim the pieces of her life that had been taken. I'm going to find him, she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. I'm going to tell him the truth. Clara stood, her expression pleading. Eleanor, please, think about what this will do to him. He's built a life on what we told him. If you show up now, it could destroy him. Destroy him. Eleanor's voice was a whisper, sharp with pain. You destroyed me. You and Richard. You don't get to decide what's best for my son anymore. She left Clara's house without another word, the journal still in her hand. The drive back home was quieter, the rain having stopped, leaving the world glistening and raw. Eleanor's mind was a battlefield, anger at Richard, grief for the years lost, and a desperate hope to see her son again. She didn't know how she'd face Richard, but she knew she couldn't go back to the life they'd lived, a life built on lies. When she walked into the house, Richard was waiting in the living room, his face haggard. Ellie, he said, standing. I'm so sorry. I thought I was protecting you. Protecting me, she said, her voice low. Dangerous. You lied to me every day for 20 years. You watched me mourn our son, and you said nothing. How could you? Richard's eyes filled with tears, but Eleanor felt no pity. It was a mistake, he said. I thought I was saving you. Saving him. The man who threatened us was dangerous. Ellie, I didn't know what else to do. You could have told me, she said. You could have trusted me. Instead, you chose to break me. She threw the journal at his feet, the pages splaying open. I'm going to find him, Richard, and you can't stop me. She didn't wait for his response. She grabbed her keys and left again, this time heading for the city. Clara had given her an address, reluctantly, and Eleanor clung to it like a lifeline. The drive was long, the night stretching endlessly before her, but she didn't care. She would find Daniel David and she would make things right, no matter the cost. The city was a maze of lights and noise, so different from the quiet town she'd left behind. She found the address, a small apartment building in a working-class neighborhood. Her heart pounded as she climbed the stairs to the third floor, her legs heavy with the weight of 20 years. She knocked on the door, her breath shallow, her hands shaking. The door opened, and there he was, a young man, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes that were so much like hers. He looked at her, confused, his brow furrowing. Can I help you? He asked, his voice deep, unfamiliar. Eleanor's throat closed. She wanted to say everything to tell him she was his mother, that she'd never stopped loving him, that she'd been robbed of him. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she said, My name is Eleanor. I knew your parents. His expression softened, curiosity replacing confusion. My parents. They died when I was a kid. She nodded, her heart breaking all over again. Can we talk? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. There's something you need to know. David invited Eleanor into his small apartment, the space cluttered but warm, with tools scattered on a table and a faint smell of motor oil lingering in the air. He gestured to a worn couch, his expression a mix of curiosity and wariness. Eleanor sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, the journal burning a hole in her purse. She studied him, drinking in every detail, the curve of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled when he frowned. So like her own. He was her son, yet a stranger, and the weight of that truth threatened to crush her. "You said you knew my parents?" David asked, leaning against the counter, his arms crossed. "What's this about?" Eleanor took a deep breath, her heart racing. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind during the drive. But now, faced with him, the words felt inadequate. "David," she began, her voice trembling. "There's no easy way to say this. I'm your mother." The silence that followed was deafening. David's face froze, his eyes narrowing as he processed her words. "My mother," he said, his voice sharp. "My mother died when I was 8. In a car accident." "What are you talking about?" Eleanor's hands shook as she pulled the journal from her purse. "I thought you were dead, too," she said, her voice breaking. "For 20 years. I believed it. I buried an empty coffin. I grieved you every day. But I found this." She held up the journal, its worn cover a testament to the secrets it held. "Your father Richard hid you. He and his sister, Clara, made me believe you were gone to protect you from a threat. I only found out yesterday." David stared at the journal, his expression unreadable. "This is crazy," he said, running a hand through his hair. "You're saying my whole life is a lie. That Clara isn't my aunt. That my parents didn't die?" Eleanor nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry, David. I didn't know. If I had, I would have fought for you. I would have torn the world apart to find you." He paced the small room, his hands clenched into fists. Why would they do this? Why would they lie to me? To you? His voice cracked, and Eleanor saw the boy he'd been, a boy who trusted, who loved, who had been taken from her. "I don't have all the answers," she said softly. "But I know I've lost 20 years with you, and I don't want to lose another moment. I want to know you, David. I want to be your mother again." He stopped pacing, his eyes meeting hers. There was pain there, and anger, but also a flicker of something else, curiosity, maybe hope. "I don't even know where to start," he said, his voice low. "I've spent my whole life thinking I was alone. Clara was all I had. And now you're telling me she lied to me, too." Eleanor reached out, her hand hovering in the air, wanting to touch him but afraid he'd pull away. "Clara thought she was protecting you," she said. "So did Richard. But they were wrong. They took away your choice. And mine. I want to make that right." David sat on the couch across from her, his shoulders slumped. "What now?" he asked. "You just show up. And I'm supposed to, what? Call you Mom? Pretend the last 20 years didn't happen?" "No," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "I don't expect that. I just want a chance to know you. To be part of your life. If you'll let me." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers. And for a moment, she saw the little boy she'd lost, the one who'd run to her with open arms. "I need time," he said finally. "This is a lot." Eleanor nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I'll wait," she said, "as long as it takes." She left his apartment with a heavy heart but a spark of hope. She had found him. He was real, alive, and within reach. But the road ahead was uncertain, and the betrayal still burned. When she returned home, Richard was waiting, his face etched with worry. "Did you find him?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Eleanor said, her tone cold. "No thanks to you." "Ellie, please," he said, stepping toward her. "I did what I thought was right." "You thought wrong," she said, her voice sharp. "You took my son from me. You took his life from him. How do I forgive that?" Richard's face crumpled, but Eleanor felt no sympathy. She walked past him, up to their bedroom, and locked the door. She needed space, time to process the truth and decide what came next. But one thing was certain: she would fight for David, for the chance to rebuild what had been stolen. The days that followed were a blur of emotion for Eleanor. She woke each morning with David's face in her mind, his eyes so like her own, his voice a stranger's. She wanted to call him, to rush back to his apartment and beg him to let her in. But she forced herself to wait. He had asked for time, and she would give it to him, even if it tore her apart. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a battleground. Richard moved through it like a ghost. His attempts at conversation met with her silence. She couldn't look at him without seeing the journal, the lies, the years he'd stolen. Eleanor spent her days piecing together the past, digging through old letters, bank statements, anything that might confirm or explain Richard's actions. She found a receipt for a payment to a private investigator, dated a year after Daniel's death. It was a small clue, but it fueled her determination to uncover the full truth. She called Clara, demanding more details, but Clara's answers were vague, her guilt palpable. "I thought I was doing the right thing," Clara said again, her voice breaking. Eleanor hung up, her anger undiminished. One evening, as she sat in the living room, a knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find David standing there, his hands in his pockets, his expression guarded but softer than before. "Can I come in?" he asked. Eleanor's heart leapt. "Of course," she said, stepping aside. She glanced at Richard, who stood frozen in the doorway to the kitchen, his face a mix of hope and fear. David's eyes flicked to him, then back to Eleanor, and she saw the tension in his jaw. "I've been thinking about what you said," David began, sitting on the couch. "About everything. I looked through some old stuff Clara kept, photos, letters. There was one of you holding me when I was a baby. I didn't know what to make of it at first, but it felt real." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "It was real," she said. "I loved you so much, David. I still do." He nodded, his gaze dropping to his hands. "I talked to Clara. She told me about the threat, about why they hid me. I'm trying to understand, but it's hard. I feel like I don't know who I am anymore." Eleanor reached out, this time touching his hand. He didn't pull away. "You're still you," she said softly. "And you're my son. That will never change." David's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of trust. "I want to know you," he said, "but I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be a son." "We'll figure it out together," Eleanor said, her voice trembling with hope. "One step at a time." Richard stepped forward, his voice hesitant. "David, I'm so sorry. I thought I was protecting you." David's expression hardened. "You lied to me my whole life," he said. "You let me think I was an orphan. I don't know if I can forgive that." Richard nodded, his face crumpling. "I understand," he said. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." David didn't respond, but he didn't leave either. They talked for hours, Eleanor sharing memories of his childhood, the little moments she'd clung to, the way he'd loved building forts, his obsession with fire trucks. David listened, his expression softening as the stories brought back faint echoes of a life he'd forgotten. When he left, promising to call soon, Eleanor felt a weight lift, though the pain remained. She turned to Richard, who stood silently in the corner. "I don't know if I can live with you anymore," she said, her voice steady. "Not after this." Richard's eyes filled with tears, but he nodded. "I'll give you space," he said. "I'll do whatever you need." Eleanor didn't respond. She went to bed that night alone, the journal on her nightstand, a reminder of the truth she'd uncovered and the long road ahead. Eleanor and David began to rebuild their relationship slowly, like piecing together a shattered vase. They met for coffee, then lunches, each conversation a tentative step toward connection. David shared pieces of his life, his love for fixing cars, his quiet evenings reading sci-fi novels, his dreams of opening his own garage. Eleanor listened, memorizing every detail, her heart swelling with pride and aching with the years she'd missed. She told him stories of his childhood, careful not to overwhelm him, and each smile he gave her felt like a gift. But the shadow of Richard's betrayal lingered. Eleanor couldn't bring herself to forgive him. Not yet. He had moved into the guest room, giving her the space she demanded. But his presence in the house was a constant reminder of the lie. She found herself questioning everything: their marriage, their life together, the man she thought she knew. She began seeing a therapist, a kind woman named Linda, who helped her navigate the tangled mess of grief, anger, and hope. One afternoon, David invited Eleanor to his garage, a small shop filled with the hum of machinery and the scent of oil. He showed her a vintage car he was restoring, his hands moving with confidence as he explained the process. "This is what I love," he said, a shy smile on his face. "It's like giving something broken a second chance." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "You're so much like your grandfather," she said. "He loved cars, too." David's smile faded slightly, and he looked away. "I wish I'd known him. I wish I'd known you." "You will," Eleanor said, her voice firm. "We have time now." That evening, David asked about Richard. "What's going to happen with you two?" he said, his tone careful. "He's still your husband." "My father." Eleanor sighed, her heart heavy. "I don't know," she admitted. "I loved him for so long. But it's changed everything. I need to figure out who I am without the lie." David nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I get it," he said. "I'm still figuring out who I am, too." Their conversations grew deeper, more honest. David admitted he was angry at Clara, at Richard, at the life he'd been denied. But he also spoke of gratitude for the stability Clara had given him, for the chance to meet Eleanor now. "I don't know if I can call you Mom yet," he said one day, his voice soft. "But I want to try." Eleanor's heart soared, though she kept her response gentle. "Whenever you're ready," she said. "I'm here." At home, Richard tried to bridge the gap, leaving notes with apologies, offering to talk whenever she was ready. But Eleanor wasn't ready. She needed to heal, to rebuild her trust in herself before she could even consider forgiving him. She threw herself into her time with David, cherishing every moment, every small step toward the bond they were forging. One night, as she sat in the attic, looking through Daniel's old drawings, she found a letter she'd written to him after his death, a letter she'd never sent, pouring out her love and grief. She read it now, tears streaming down her face, and realized that the love she'd felt then was still alive, still burning. She was his mother, and nothing, not time, not lies, could take that away. Months passed, and Eleanor's life found a new rhythm. She and David met weekly, their bond growing stronger with each conversation, each shared memory. He began to call her Mom in small, tentative moments, and each time, Eleanor felt a piece of her heart mend. They laughed over old photos, cried over the years lost, and built a future together, one moment at a time. David introduced her to his friends, his world, and Eleanor marveled at the man he'd become: strong, kind, resilient. But the question of Richard remained unresolved. Eleanor had avoided confronting him fully, her anger a wall she couldn't yet dismantle. One evening, as she sat in the living room, Richard approached her, his hands trembling. "Ellie," he said, his voice soft, "I know I've hurt you in a way I can never undo. But I love you. I love David. I want to try to make this right." Eleanor looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in months. She saw the man she'd loved for decades, but also the man who'd betrayed her. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said honestly, "but I'm willing to try for David. For me. For us." They began therapy together, a slow, painful process of unraveling the lies and rebuilding trust. Richard shared the details of the Thrida business rival who'd sworn revenge, who'd been arrested years ago, the danger long gone. He admitted his fear had driven him to make the wrong choice, to prioritize safety over truth. Eleanor listened, her heart softening but not fully yielding. One day, David asked to meet Richard. The three of them sat in Eleanor's living room, the air thick with tension. David spoke first, his voice steady but laced with pain. "I don't know if I can call you Dad," he said, "but I want to understand why you did it. I want to know you, too." Richard's eyes filled with tears, and he nodded. "I'll tell you everything," he said, "and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." The conversation was raw, halting, but it was a start. Eleanor watched her son and her husband take their first steps toward each other, and she felt a flicker of hope. The road to forgiveness was long, but it was possible. They were a family, broken but not destroyed, and they would find their way together. Eleanor stood by the window, watching the rain fall softly outside, the same rain that had accompanied her discovery of the truth. But now, it felt different, cleansing, renewing. She had her son back, and though the scars of the past would always remain, they were building something new. A family, not perfect, but real. And that was enough.